My wife got a new job and threw a party using my money. When I asked why, This is the story of Jonathan Pierce and his wife Rachel Pierce. The receipt was still on the kitchen counter when he got home, folded once, carelessly, the way Rachel folded things she meant to discard but hadn't yet. Jonathan set his keys beside it without picking it up. He loosened his tie, filled a glass of water, and stood at the window for a while, looking at the neighbor's oak tree. Then he picked it up. It was from a catering company he didn't recognize. The total was $4,200. The date was 11 days away. He set it back down. Their marriage was 11 years old, and it had the texture of something well used, familiar to the hand, slightly worn at the edges but still functional. Jonathan was a structural engineer, methodical by nature, the kind of man who checked tire pressure before long drives and kept a household ledger in a spreadsheet that hadn't been opened in 4 months, because Rachel had said the whole exercise made her feel like they were running a nonprofit. They had argued about that, mildly, and then not argued about it, which was a different thing. Rachel had been trying to break into corporate consulting for 3 years. She was smart, sharper than most people in the rooms she entered, and she knew it, which was both her greatest asset and the source of a quiet friction between them that neither had named aloud. She'd done the courses, the networking events, the coffees with people she found exhausting. Jonathan had watched all of it with something he told himself was support, though on certain evenings, when she came home more energized by those coffees than by anything that happened between them, it felt like something else. He didn't bring up the receipt that night. He cooked pasta, she ate quickly while checking her phone, and she told him she had a final round interview with Klein Partners the following Tuesday. He said he'd have dinner waiting. She kissed him on the cheek and went to her home office. He washed the dishes and thought about the receipt and thought about the joint account. 3 weeks earlier, without telling Rachel, he had moved most of his direct deposit into a separate account. Not out of spite, out of something quieter than that. A kind of preemptive steadiness, the same instinct that made him check the tire pressure. He wasn't sure what he was bracing for. He told himself it was nothing. The receipt stayed on the counter for 2 more days. Rachel never mentioned it. She got the job. She called him at 2:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, and her voice had a quality he hadn't heard in years, bright and almost startled, like she'd been half expecting failure. He said, "That's incredible," and he meant it, or meant something close to it, something that overlapped with it at the edges. She said they were taking her on as a senior strategy associate, that Stephen Klein himself had been in the final interview, that the starting salary was 40% above what she'd been making. Jonathan said all the right things and then sat at his desk for a few minutes doing nothing. That evening she opened a bottle of Sancerre they'd been saving for something and said, "I want to do a proper celebration, invite people, have it at the Fenwick Room at the Harrington. I've always liked that space." He said, "That's the venue downtown? It's perfect for this kind of thing." He thought about the receipt on the counter. He thought about the $4,200. "How are you thinking of covering it?" She looked at him with a slight tilt to her head, the way she looked when she found a question mildly beneath her. "The joint account. It's a joint expense." Jonathan said sure, and then said nothing else, because the thing he wanted to say required a longer conversation than a Tuesday evening could hold. What he did not say was, "The joint account is almost empty," because he had moved his money, because something in him had already been preparing for this, though he could not have said for what. What Rachel did not say, what she was not yet ready to say, was that she had quietly moved $9,000 of her own savings into a personal account 3 months ago, after a conversation with her friend Dana about financial autonomy in marriage, and that the joint account, which she still considered Jonathan's responsibility in some unexamined way, had been running low for longer than she'd noticed. She had not looked at the balance. She told herself this was not avoidance. She told herself she'd been busy. In bed that night, Jonathan read. Rachel scrolled. She laughed at something once and didn't share it. He listened to her breathing eventually slow into sleep, and thought about the ledger he hadn't opened in 4 months, and thought about whether he had ever really known what she wanted, or whether he had only known what she had told him. He remembered, with the particular clarity of half-sleep, the afternoon 7 years ago, when they'd driven to the coast, the windows down, neither of them talking for 40 minutes, and neither of them minding. He missed that silence. The silence they had now was a different architecture entirely. She'd started talking about Stephen Klein, the way people talk about someone whose opinion has recently become important to them, first by name, then as Stephen, then with small specific details. Stephen thought the industry was moving toward embedded advisory models. Stephen had rebuilt his firm from 9 people to 60 in 4 years. Jonathan absorbed these details without comment, the way he absorbed most things now. The party invitations went out without him seeing the guest list first. He came home one evening to find Rachel on a call, gesturing animatedly, saying, "No, the Fenwick room is confirmed. I'll text you the time." And she looked up at him and raised one finger. 1 minute. And he went to the kitchen and stood at the counter, and it was exactly like standing at the counter with the receipt, except that this time there was no paper to put down. He pulled up the joint account on his phone. The balance was $847. He stood very still. She came in 5 minutes later, still glowing. She poured herself a glass of the Sancerre, which was almost finished now, and said 43 people confirmed. "Stephen's bringing his wife." Jonathan said, "How much have you spent from the joint account?" She paused just slightly. "It's our money, Jonathan. I know it is. How much?" "I don't know exactly." "Why are you doing this right now?" He looked at her. He thought about saying, "Because there's $847 in the account and the catering company hasn't been paid yet." He thought about saying, "Because I've been watching something happen for months and I kept deciding not to look at it." Instead, he said, "I just want to know the number." She said, "I'll send you the breakdown," and left the kitchen, and she never sent the breakdown. He opened his phone and looked at the balance again. Then he did something she didn't know about. He transferred $5,000 from his separate account into the joint account. Enough to cover the party. Enough to let things continue exactly as they were. He wasn't sure why. He'd look at the answer later, when it was easier to hold. He was sitting on the couch 2 nights before the party, when she was on a video call with someone. He could hear the tone of it, the specific register she used for professional warmth. He wasn't listening exactly, but he caught a phrase. "Jonathan's supportive. He gets that this is my time now." He sat with that for a while. My time now. As if his time had already been accounted for. As if 11 years had been the necessary prelude to this, and now the prelude was over. He said nothing when she got off the call. He asked what she wanted for dinner. She said she wasn't hungry. He made himself a sandwich and ate it standing at the counter, which was a thing he did when he didn't want to perform the act of eating at a table. He was getting ready for bed when she said, from the bathroom, "I think things are really about to change for us." He said, "Yeah, I mean actually change. Like, structurally." He thought, "I know a thing or two about structures." He said, "That sounds good." She came to the door with her face half-washed, looking younger than 41. "You're not excited." He looked at her. "I am." She looked at him for a moment and then looked away. And the thing that passed between them in that second was enormous and shapeless, and neither of them reached for it. "You know," she said, half to herself, half to the room, "sometimes I feel like I'm explaining myself to someone who's already decided what to think." She paused. "Like, I don't know, maybe like this story or subscribe or something." She laughed, a little, and it was a strange laugh, half a word and half nothing, and she shook her head as if she'd surprised herself. He stared at her. She blinked. "What? Nothing," he said. "Get some sleep." The Fenwick room had tall ceilings and amber lighting, and the kind of acoustics that made everything sound slightly more elegant than it was. Rachel wore a black dress he hadn't seen before. She moved through the room with the ease of someone who had been practicing for this specific evening for years, which Jonathan understood. She had been. He stood near the bar and watched her. The people were largely from her professional world. Some he recognized, most he didn't. There were the colleagues from her previous firm who'd always treated her like a step behind. There was Dana, who greeted him with excessive warmth. There was Stephen Klein. Stephen Klein was 52 and had the compact confidence of a man who had been right often enough to stop questioning himself. He was taller than Jonathan expected. He found Rachel almost immediately upon entering, and the way he held her hand in both of his for the handshake, the way Rachel's chin lifted slightly when he did it, was something Jonathan observed with the detached precision of a man reading structural load. He wasn't angry. That surprised him, faintly. He had expected to be angry, and instead he felt something more like the specific sadness of confirming something you'd already known for a while. He watched Stephen Klein touch Rachel's elbow to steer her toward a group of people. He watched her let him. An hour into the party, Rachel found him near the window. She was flushed, happy, and she put her hand on his arm and said, "Are you okay? You seem." "I'm fine. You're doing the thing where you stand slightly too still. I was just thinking about the account." A small stillness passed across her face. "Jonathan, there was $847 in there, Rachel." She looked around briefly to see if anyone was close. "Can we please not do this here? I'm not doing anything. I'm telling you a number." "You moved money," she said, lower now. "I know you moved money. I'm not an idiot." "I know you're not. You've been building some kind of." She searched for the word position. Like this whole thing was a negotiation. He looked at her. "I've been watching you spend money we didn't discuss spending. On a party I wasn't consulted about. For a room full of people, including your boss, who you talk about differently than you talk about me." He said it evenly, without force, the way he said most things. "I wasn't building a position. I was trying to understand what's happening." She looked away. Her jaw shifted slightly. "I've also been watching you for about 2 years," he continued. "Figure out who you want to be. And I've been trying to figure out if I'm in that picture." "That's not fair. I didn't say it was." She was quiet. Someone laughed loudly across the room. The amber light held everything in a kind of false warmth. "I have debts," she said finally, quietly. "I took some out when the consulting career wasn't, when things were slow. I was handling it." "How much?" she told him. He nodded slowly, absorbing the number the way he absorbed most numbers, with patience, without visible reaction. "Were you going to tell me when it was resolved?" "That's not how this works." "I know." She said it small, which was unusual for her. "I know that." The party continued around them, indifferent. Stephen Klein was laughing at something across the room. Rachel looked at him, not at Stephen, but at Jonathan, with an expression he hadn't seen in a while, something unguarded and tired. He said, "I'm going to go. I'll see you at home." She didn't say don't go. That told him something. He put his jacket on. He thanked the bartender. He drove home in the quiet and sat in the driveway for 15 minutes before going inside. In the weeks after the party, Rachel became very busy. This was partly true and partly a chosen thing. There were genuine demands of the new job, the early mornings, the reports, the rhythm of proving herself in a new environment. But there was also the busyness she manufactured, the density of scheduled things. Because when the schedule was dense, there was less time to sit with the conversation by the window at the Fenwick room. She told Dana, "Jonathan has always had this withholding quality. He gives you just enough and then waits to see what you do with it." Dana nodded, and Rachel felt the relief of narrative, of her own experience articulated back to her in a shape she could hold. She did not think much about the $9,000 she'd moved to her personal account. She did not think much about the $4,200 catering receipt left on the counter. In her reconstruction, what remained was the feeling of standing in that amber room, in a dress she'd paid for herself, in a job she'd earned herself, and having her husband choose that specific moment to talk about numbers. Jonathan, meanwhile, closed the joint account. He did not tell her immediately. He moved the remaining balance, his transferred $5,000, minus the catering and venue, which had finally cleared, back to his separate account. He opened a second savings account, which he called, in his phone's note app, Next Step, and began directing the maximum amount there each pay cycle. He didn't know what next step meant yet. He was building toward clarity rather than away from it. He also, in this period, became uncharacteristically social. He had dinner twice with his college friend, Marcus, who was divorced, and had opinions about it that Jonathan found useful, not because they were right, but because they were honest. He started running again, the way he'd run in his 20s, early mornings, no music, just the city in its gray morning version. He lost 8 pounds without trying. He noticed that he was sleeping better alone. When Rachel came home late and he was already under, he did not hate her. That was the thing he kept returning to. He had expected some version of hate to emerge, clean, clarifying, and instead what remained was something murkier, more tender. He had loved her in the kitchen 11 years ago. He had loved the way she argued, and the way she looked at problems, and the way she'd reached for his hand in the car, without looking away from the window. He still loved those things, which were still real, which was part of why this was complicated. The debts she'd mentioned, he'd looked them up, or rather, he'd run the numbers, because she hadn't offered specifics beyond the total. Credit cards, he guessed, and possibly a personal loan. The amount was significant, but not catastrophic. He thought about this, about whether to offer to help resolve them, and decided not to. Not because he wanted her to struggle, because offering would be a way of continuing something, and he wasn't sure what he wanted to continue. She made overtures, some of them, small ones. She cooked on a Sunday and left his plate in the oven when he was at Marcus's. She sent him a link to a podcast she'd heard and thought he'd like. A structural engineering story, actually, about the collapse of a famous bridge. And there was something in the gesture that was almost the old them, the easy signal of "I thought of you." He listened to the podcast. He texted, "Good one, thanks," she replied with a thumbs up. Stephen Klein's name stopped appearing in her evening monologues around week 3, Jonathan noticed. He did not ask. One Saturday morning, she found him at the kitchen table, with the note app open, the one that said "Next Step." She didn't see the label. She said, "What are you doing?" He looked up. "Planning." She poured coffee and stood at the counter, and they looked at each other across the kitchen for a moment, across the 11 years and the party and the receipt and the $847, and everything they hadn't said when they had the chance to say it. She said, "Jonathan." He said, "I know." She said, "I don't know what I'm saying." He said, "I know that too." She looked down at her coffee. "I'm sorry about the account, the way I handled it." "Okay, is that all you're going to say?" He thought about it. "It's what I have right now." She stood there a moment longer, and then she went to her home office. And the day passed like a Sunday passes, the way time moves when neither person is forcing it. She brought it up on a Thursday, which was ordinary in every other way. She'd had a long week at Klein Partners. She was tired. She had a glass of wine at the counter while he made dinner. She said, "I've been looking at apartments." He said, "Okay, just looking." She paused. "I think I needed to know it was possible." He stirred the pan. He said, "I closed the joint account." She was quiet for a moment. "When?" "About 6 weeks ago." She held her glass with both hands. "Were you going to tell me?" "I'm telling you now." The kitchen was warm, garlic and butter, the familiar choreography of the meal. He turned the heat down. She said, "I think I've been waiting for you to be angrier at me." He thought about that. He said, "Been waiting for that too. And I'm not. I'm just," he considered the word, "tired." Not angry tired, just tired. She nodded slowly. She turned the wine glass in her hands. She said, "I think I started treating this marriage like something to outgrow, like it was the phase before the thing I actually wanted." She didn't look at him when she said it. "I don't know when that started." He said, "I do." She looked up. "About 3 years ago," he said, "after the second networking thing where you came home and couldn't stop talking about the people there. You came alive talking about strangers in a way you stopped coming alive talking to me." The sentence sat between them. "I didn't know you felt that," she said. "I didn't say it." "Why not?" He turned back to the stove. "Because I think I was hoping I was wrong." She set her wine glass down. Outside, it was raining faintly, the kind of rain that appears without announcement. A low-grade persistent sound against the window. She said, "The apartment is in Midtown. The rent is $2,400. That's reasonable for the area." She laughed, a short, helpless thing, more exhale than laugh. "You're doing the numbers." "I always do the numbers." She looked at him, this man she had shared a kitchen with for 11 years, who had cooked pasta while she ate quickly, who had moved money to protect himself from her in the only way he knew how, who had driven home from her party in silence and then sat in the driveway and then come inside and never once shouted. She wondered when the last time was that she'd asked him how he was. She couldn't locate the date. "I think I want to try," she said, "to fix it." He was quiet for a long time. The rain held on. "I think I wanted you to want to fix it 8 months ago," he said. "Before the party, before the account, before all of this." He looked at her. "I don't know if wanting to now is the same thing." Her eyes went bright, briefly, in the way of someone receiving accurate news. He put dinner on the table. She sat down. They ate. It was a strange meal, careful, quiet, full of the specific attention people pay when they understand that ordinary things are passing. He asked about her week. She told him, and the telling was honest in a way their conversations hadn't been for a while. She asked about a project he was working on and listened. Actually listened, not the surface listening she drifted into. And he felt it, which made it worse, somehow, rather than better. After dinner, she said, "So that's it," he said. "I don't know yet." She nodded. She washed her glass in his. She dried her hands on the dish towel and hung it back on the handle, small acts of order. She picked up her bag. At the doorway to the hall, she stopped and turned, and they looked at each other one more time. Across the kitchen, across all the unsaid things, across the distance that had been building since approximately the second networking event in a year. Rachel couldn't exactly remember, which Jonathan remembered precisely. She said, "For what it's worth, the party, that was wrong. I knew it was wrong before I did it." He said, "I know you did." She went upstairs. He sat at the table for a while. He opened the note on his phone that said next step. He looked at it. He didn't type anything. Outside, the rain continued, indifferent and small and very steady, doing what rain does when there's no one to name it.